Making money green, investing in renewable sources of energy. The topic of global warming has been around for decades, yet it has been a topic that until recently was easy to ignore by most of us, lurking in the back of our minds as an apocalyptic end to humanity as we know it. These predictions were so dire as to seem more like the storyline of a Hollywood blockbuster than an actual prediction of the future condition of the planet. Well, come 2018, and we see that climate change is affecting us all in varying degrees. These effects can be anything from longer drought periods, flooding as sea levels rise, water pollution, stronger and more frequent storms, and extreme weather patterns. As these natural disasters become more frequent, the environmental, health, and societal effects have become inescapable and hard to ignore. According to the most recent report released by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, we have already reached a global increase in temperature of 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and are well on our way to reach the 1.5 degree mark sometime between 2030 and 2050. In fact, if we don't take immediate action, the increase in temperature is projected to reach the 2 degree mark by the end of the century. The sources of energy the world consumes annually come from oil, coal, and gas, which are the main polluters of the environment, costing taxpayers billions of dollars on cleanup efforts and putting a huge strain on the healthcare system. They are also the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, which trap heat in our atmosphere and cause the global temperature to rise. Global emissions of carbon dioxide account for 75% of the greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, with methane being the second largest. Methane is primarily released by the oil and gas industries, but also by agriculture and livestock and decomposing organic waste in landfills. In addition, the amount of methane in the atmosphere is expected to increase due to melting permafrost and a combination of wetter and warmer weather patterns. Burning fossil fuels has long been regarded as the most cost-effective mode of generating energy. This is due in part to incomplete economic models that primarily focused on the cost of exploration, extraction, energy generation, and distribution for the oil, coal, and gas industries. Global subsidies to each of those industries also had the effect of creating artificially low consumer prices. The true cost of fossil fuels. According to a 2015 report on global energy subsidies by the International Monetary Fund, the true cost of externalities of the use of fossil fuels is $5.3 trillion per year, approximately 6.5% of global GDP. The IMF considered these externalities a form of post-tax subsidies that displace the cost to individuals and society as a whole. The report recognized the following points. Energy subsidies damage the environment, causing more premature deaths through local air pollution, exacerbating congestion and other harmful side effects of vehicle use, and increasing greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. Energy subsidies impose large fiscal costs, which need to be financed by some combination of higher public debt, higher tax burdens, and crowding out of potentially productive public spending. For example, on health, education, and infrastructure, all of which can be a drag on economic growth. Energy subsidies discourage needed investments in energy efficiency, renewables, and energy infrastructure, and increase the vulnerability of countries to volatile international energy prices. Energy subsidies are a highly inefficient way to provide support to low-income households, since most of the benefits from energy subsidies are typically captured by rich households. This graph shows the total post-tax subsidies to the energy industries emitting greenhouse gases. It also shows the global pre-tax energy subsidies, which are approximately $500 billion on average, equivalent to about a third of annual global GDP. In 2015, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon urged the global community to invest $6 billion annually in prevention, saying that natural disasters cost the world $300 billion annually, on average. He declared we can watch that number grow as more people suffer, or we can dramatically lower that figure and invest the savings in development. All this information begs the question, why are we subsidizing industries that are not only creating higher environmental, healthcare, and societal costs, but that are also exacerbating global warming? Why are we not investing that money on developing programs and technologies that could potentially reduce greenhouse gas emissions while promoting energy efficiency and societal benefits? Clearly, we find ourselves supporting a broken paradigm. In the past, it may have made economic sense to support subsidies to these industries, but now, continued support of those industries is only supporting our own demise. So how can we transform our energy dependence on fossil fuels and switch to 100% renewable sources of energy? How much global investment would that require? The IPCC report previously mentioned concluded that the global investment necessary for the world to transition from fossil fuels energy dependence and into renewable sources of energy would require anywhere from $1.6 trillion to $3.8 trillion a year in 2010 US dollars, with an average of about $3 trillion to $3.5 trillion a year from 2016 to 2050. One popular proposed solution is to bring the cost of generating energy from fossil fuels to a more realistic level by imposing a fee on each ton of carbon dioxide emitted, called a carbon tax. Carbon taxes are calculated by measuring the social cost of emitting carbon. This measure, called social carbon cost, or SCC, include healthcare costs, environmental disaster and events, loss of economic growth due to pollution, property damage, etc. SCC is meant to be a comprehensive measure of the cost of carbon pollution, and is a useful measure for assessing the effects that changes in carbon dioxide emissions have on the climate. The global SCC has been calculated to be anywhere from $37 to $200, but a recent study calculated it closer to $477, with higher emission countries having a higher share. The updated calculated SCC for the two largest polluters is $50 for the United States and $90 for India. In addition, a recent study by MIT concluded that carbon taxes can be both fair and effective. The study found that a U.S. carbon tax of $50 increased by 5% annually would be sufficient to reduce U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by 63% by 2050. Part of the revenue could be used to compensate lower-income households who would be the most affected by an increase in energy costs. The rest could be used toward research and development and adaptation and implementation of renewable sources of energy. The global community must therefore impose a carbon tax on industries that is commensurate with the amount of global greenhouse gases they emit, and distribute the revenue back to municipalities and districts in order to support the transition to 100% renewable energy. How will a successful transition be implemented? By the exploration and identification of appropriate locations for the construction of solar and wind farms, and bioenergy, geothermal, and hydropower plants, along with financing and investment for the construction of such infrastructure. By the gradual retirement of coal, oil, and gas power plants during the transition to 100% renewable sources of energy. By subsidizing job training for low and middle class residents, and retraining for workers in the coal, oil, and gas industry toward a transition into jobs that support the installation and maintenance of renewable energy sources. By mandates requiring all existing and new infrastructure operate on 100% electricity, with financial support for the conversion of existing infrastructure. Municipalities must also create and promote programs that encourage low and middle class consumers to enter the market for renewable energy. This can be done by offering low-cost financing, leases, and grants for home improvement and solar energy installation and storage. These programs would be based on sliding income requirements to ensure those who are the most adversely affected get their largest benefit. By creating community share programs that include tenants and property owners who cannot afford or whose housing is not suitable for solar panels, and by requiring community sharing programs maintain a minimum percentage of low-income residents as participants, and create tax incentives to corporations, financial institutions, and businesses to invest in such programs. In the public and private sector, this can be done by requiring that all businesses and public buildings switch their energy consumption to electricity, by requiring solar panels, insulation, electrical heating, and smart energy use and storage for any new development in the public and private sector, by offering low-cost financing and leases to qualified small businesses for the installation of solar panels and the adoption of energy optimization and storage systems, by requiring insulation upgrades in public schools, hospitals, and all other public buildings to improve energy efficiency. As the carbon tax will increase year to year, it will become more expensive for consumers to own vehicles that run on carbon fuels. States and districts can impose mandates for zero-emission vehicles while also offering tax credits toward their purchase. Districts must also transition all public transportation to zero-emission vehicles and encourage the installation of electric chargers in every shopping center, supermarket, parking structure, etc., while also mandating installation of electric chargers on streets and roads to support the transition to 100% electric modes of transportation. Governments must also support their country's air travel and transportation industries with the transition to low or zero-emission technologies. These technologies would run primarily on electricity with backup biofuels or drop-in fuels generated by the collection of food and agricultural waste products. In terms of agriculture and food waste, municipalities can act by creating residential and commercial food waste collection programs similar to recycling programs. This will drastically reduce the amount of methane released into the atmosphere, which accounts for 1/3 of global methane emissions, and provide the organic waste necessary for the production of biofuels and plant-based lubricants. By creating an industrial-sized composting center to replace synthetic fertilizers for agricultural use, thereby cutting the use of natural gas in the production of fertilizers while regenerating the soil for optimal carbon dioxide sequestration. And by requiring the optimization of methane capture from agriculture and livestock while promoting the sale of this methane for the conversion of fuel and electricity. The transition to 100% renewable energy sources will require that each one of us as individuals and as a global community challenge ourselves to a new way of life, one in which we will not only have to adapt to the changing conditions of the environment, but also to new ways of looking at how we generate and consume energy. It is a great challenge, but it's not the first time we create incredible things, like putting a man on the moon or exploring other planets, none of which threatened our survival. This is the biggest challenge in the history of humanity, and we must come together in order to save ourselves and create a livable planet for future generations.